So it's kind of a big pleasure, I think, to kind of introduce the next speaker. I think for us, this was a really big aim of this conference, to get a principal to come today to help advocate for some of the work. And I think a lot of people in this room will talk about actually how much of an impact they have above, and actually if we can get the principals and those people on board, how much of a positive impact in our practices that can have. And so we're really lucky today to have Sue come talk to us. She is chair of HMC. She has an extensive background in education. She's worked in both independent and state sectors, single-sex boys and girls, co-educational, as well as the selective grammar and comprehensive schools, not only in the UK, but also internationally. So it's a big pleasure for us today to welcome Sue and for her to talk a little bit around her perspectives as a principal on athlete development.
Thank you. Good morning, folks. Thank you so much for having me, for the invitation. I have to say, I don't know if there's something going on in the water. I don't know if there's something there's a bug in the system, literally. First of all, because you'll see that Sue and I got the same memo about the jacket colour today, and even I think the shoes and trousers are all a bit of a theme. Secondly, for something I'm going to tell you in a moment. And thirdly then, because on the way here, I was talking to Lorcan about one of my favourite quotes, which is the Maya Angelou quote of, people may forget what you said, they may forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And that is exactly what you pulled up from a strength and conditioning coaching point of view at the end, and described the story of Charlie and his experience. So the second bit, the reason why I think there's a bug in the room somewhere, is because literally this is line 1 of my second paragraph. I'm not sure if any of you remember the TV game show Blockbuster. I can tell by the way you reacted to the not quite a gold run that was on the board that you probably do. This is the second time in my career when I have been associated quite out of my comfort zone with sports, health and fitness. So I'm fessing up to that straight away. It's one of the lesser known facts about me that I was a very early participant in an early series of blockbusters in the 1980s. Give us a P-Bob for those of you who remember all of that. The reason that was an uncomfortable moment was because sometimes, as well as winning money and as well as doing whatever you're doing on the gold run, sometimes you won prizes for your school. Fortunately, I was on Blockbusters paired up with a friend who was a lot cleverer than me, so that was helpful because she answered most of the questions correctly. And that made us look good, so first of all, good teamwork. But secondly, because when it got to the gold run where we won a prize for our school, we won a set of gym equipment for our school. You would not have met 2 lesser gym bunnies if you had tried. We have had such dreadful experiences of gym and all of those things we've just heard about, the way you are made to feel, especially as a young person, especially when you might be feeling uncomfortable in your skin and you are growing up through those very treacherous years, how easily you can be crushed and demoralised. So it was a bit of an irony, and I only tell the story now because you can't find any episodes on YouTube of my series. You can't find them on Dave, so don't go hunting. And my dad's old Betamax videos have long since hit the dust. So what on earth am I doing, taking this opportunity to speak to you? What on earth do I have to tell you? I should be sitting and listening just as I have done to that amazing presentation. Therefore, why did I accept your very kind invitation? Well, I think it's fair to say I recognise this is your second conference. And I am thrilled at GSAL that we have a really close connection, and we are really proud to partner with you and be part of this debate on a national level that you are pushing forward on long-term athletic development. In leading that debate, we're proud to partner with you, and as a head, I am really keen to know how we can make sure the impact of this learning and this research can improve the experiences and the lives of our children. It's a difficult theme, I think, LTAD, to bring to life in a school. And I think it's made even more so because of the pressure on budgets that we all understand. So because of that, it isn't a surprise, is it, that the work has largely begun in the partner schools that you've seen up on the screen, largely across the country too, by independent schools predominantly. For sure, we've always had access to greater budgets. We've got facilities, we've got coaches. We also have that culture of games afternoons and after-school practice sessions. So in short, you could say, that sport is in the DNA of just about any independent school that you could name. It's hugely valued by pupils, by parents, but also by the staff who take part in it. But this sense of the inequity between the state and the independent sector is an issue. And then there's a dichotomy, because the research that we have is often based in the state sector, with Sport England and the Youth Sport Trust being government funded. So we have to play our part, I think, and this is one of the reasons I was happy to accept this invitation, to start to ask the questions as head teachers: what can we do differently, and what should we be doing differently in our schools? And that includes, how can we break down the barriers between state and independent schools trying to tackle this work? Because as you heard from the introduction, I've worked in the independent sector for a lot of my career, but I've also worked in the state sector. And when I wanted to be a teacher, and I decided I wanted to be a teacher when I was 8, when I decided I wanted to be a teacher, and then I went through all of the training and the process, and I stuck with it, and when I was at university, it's still what I wanted to do passionately, I didn't go into it thinking, as is often now trolled in the social media and on the press, that I only cared about 7% of children. And really, it's insulting to suggest that's what I did. I went into teaching because I care about 100% of children. And I want to make sure that the work that we do has an impact on every child. Because as you've heard from the papers that both Sue and Kev have alluded to, the stakes could not be higher at the moment. So I think this conference is crucial because it brings together key stakeholders. Strength and conditioning coaches among you, who've traditionally been getting people fit to play competitive sport. Heads of athletic development, we've got our own Kev here in the front row, who introduce a more holistic approach, bringing the social and the psychological engagement along with the biological, although there was a great, you shortened that to something, Kev, what was that?
Biopsychosocial.
That's the one. That's great, you write that down. I didn't have to pick it up, but I'll write it before I go. And then, of course, PE teachers and directors of sports among you, who are ensuring that children in your schools are physically literate and have got strong movement competency. We've already heard about the fact this centre that has been set up here within the last year, the Centre for Child and Adolescent Physical Literacy, is trying to pave the way for a new way of using the information we have gathered and channeling it into something positive that will benefit our children. That is all really important. So what does it mean then for a head in this context? Well, if I look back on what's currently a 36-year career in education, you can imagine how much has changed. I started teaching in an era where we didn't have photocopiers, we had bander machines, where we didn't have emails, we had memos in your pigeonhole. Obviously no digital learning technologies, the dreaded mobile phones. I mean, I don't even think schools I started in had a computer. And I think when we all got our first computer in a school, it was really regarded as quite a radical thing. And people thought it might actually help run the school better. Wowza. And we have seen the world shift alongside that to a much more sedentary lifestyle. We don't allow our children, like I did as a child, went off on my bike for the day at the beginning of the day, didn't turn back up at home till tea time. Nobody had any idea where you were, who you were with. We don't allow that because we think that's so dangerous for our children today. And yet we want to keep them close and keep them safe. So we let them stay in their homes and in their bedrooms, dealing with people all over the world, for whom actually we have no idea whether they are safe or not. And we certainly know that there's not just the potential lack of physical activity that is harming for them, but actually the potentially unhealthy online relationships that they might be forming. It will, of course, cause physical damage, but they could also cause psychological and emotional damage. So I think it's never been more important in my career for children to be involved in sports and activity, not least to support their current and future well-being, as well as to support and nurture any talent they might have in high-performance sport. So if you then say, well, what are some of the exciting things you've seen in a career, Sue? Well, I have to say, one of the most exciting things has been the developments I've witnessed based on the increased research in teaching and learning. We know now so much more about how children learn, how they can self-assess and reflect, how we can help them, how we can make sure that our curriculum, that the skills they learn are all going to set them up for life. We know so much more about how children learn and develop. And we also know how they learn and can develop strength and resilience and habits for life. And you are all the practitioners in the arena of physical activity. And so this information we're gathering in teaching and learning applies to this world in school as well. And it's information that is dynamite. So at GSOL, we are delighted to benefit from a sports PhD student. Sam is researching the transition from primary to senior school. And that happens to be a key target that we're working on in every part of school life, not just in physical literacy. It's on our development plan because we're a 3 to 18 school. We want to bring a greater understanding and coherence to the teaching and learning, including of movement in our young people. As a secondary school teacher by training, I have to tell you, and it's quite depressing, I have to tell you I have seen firsthand how little collaboration there is between primary and senior schools. In education, too often, we operate in silos. And as we've heard about the importance of collaboration and coordination today, I would suggest that now has to stop. Because it isn't about the competition between schools, it's about the competition that we share, which is to do the best for our children. I've also seen too often when senior schools are not really bothered about what children have learned in any part of their school curriculum, because when they arrive in senior school, too often I see teachers always physically go, well, don't worry about that, now you're going to be properly taught, now you're going to be properly looked after, forgetting that actually all of those foundations were made years ago by those early years teachers, by those coaches when Charlie's 7, not just when Charlie's 17. So that importance for us across the piece in school, in all parts of life, as well as in physical literacy, from transition to primary and senior is critical for us. And the work that Sam is doing will not just hopefully benefit the greater pool of knowledge and research that's been gathered here, but will absolutely have a specific advantage for our school. And I think if we're then thinking, well, hang on, as heads sitting where we sit now and as school practitioners of any shape or form in this room, what on earth can we do? How can we make this better? And I would suggest that actually the challenge for us is to think about how we get into some of those national bodies who can effect change. And I don't just mean the national sporting bodies that you've already got great links with, but how can we up the ante to influence government, and I'll come on to a potential new government in a moment, but to influence government and perhaps educational think tanks and the Department for Education. How can we make sure that this changes? Because if the polls are to be believed, we are facing a potential Labour government, a government that may well be in power for the next 10 years. And we know, although not much has been published yet, including about education in yesterday's manifesto, we do know a couple of headline statements that they have made. One is they want to have a fresh look at the curriculum. Hallelujah, that's a great idea to be fair and is desperately needed. And we know from current research that there is a need to have a think about what children learn and how. And we also don't just want to rearrange our schools so that we've got lovely modern furniture that we've all purchased at huge expense, but we've arranged the classrooms exactly as they were arranged in the Victorian era. That isn't actually moving forwards based on the evidence and the research about how children learn. So we've got a stated aim from a potential Labour government about changing the curriculum. We've also got a stated aim, and of course my schools are going to provide the solution to all of this, if only that added up in the maths, but never mind, I won't go there now. But we've also got a stated aim to recruit 6,500 more teachers. That is another thing I couldn't agree with more. Obviously I don't agree with how they think they're going to raise the money, then I don't think it's going to make the difference it makes, but the need to recruit more teachers, absolutely again, like the curriculum point, completely agree with. We know there's a crisis in the pipeline that is coming through on teacher recruitment. And that will filter all its way through to head teacher recruitment as well, and already is in some parts of the country. There is a genuine crisis. So actually, if we are going to be facing potentially a 10-year government with the only two so far stated aims that affect what world we're doing. There are a few other things about breakfast clubs and making sure we bring children out of poverty, which again everyone could disagree with. But if we think about those two things, of curriculum and teacher recruitment, actually how can this part of school life play a part? And even just speaking to Fionn before we came into this lecture theatre and I heard about the MRes, actually immediately made me think that is a classic way that we could help the pipeline and the recruitment of new teachers, new bright people to come into the profession through that route. Because you're not just doing the research that you need to do, you're applying it in a real world school context. And that is super helpful. Because in the world that we all inhabit, we are coming face to face with that national and indeed we've heard global crisis in obesity and other health issues. And so it brings this part of our work in schools into sharp focus. There is a need for the research to be understood, shared and agreed so that the best way forward to set our children up to independent adulthood can be arrived at with habits for a strong and healthy life. And I have to tell you folks, I don't think that's a political point. I don't think it's an academic exercise, nor do I think it's a luxury. I think it is a deep-rooted responsibility for this moment in time and those of us who are involved in education. So in an environment where sporting and creative development has been squeezed, a new government will be clear on the 5th of July, and we need to make sure we are using all of the connections we can, and maybe some new ones that we've never used before, to shout as loudly as possible. We have got to ignite the power, reignite perhaps, of physical literacy and PE. Upskill and empower our PE teachers and ensure that all of these areas of what we now know to be the interdisciplinary nature of physical literacy, and we've seen it so well illuminated on the screen by Kev, all of those areas are brought together. And in our schools, we have a responsibility to do that. And I think in headship, I have a responsibility to do that. We know, don't we, in the research over recent years, that the data that we need helps us to know our pupils better, to support their development, and to ensure that every pupil can progress and that every pupil's experience is a positive one, and not that example we heard from Charlie and that coach. And that's where there's a difference to be made. And it's not about state schools and independent schools. And it's not about primary schools and senior schools. And it's not about the research in universities and schools in general. It's about all of this work coming together and more of the collaborations that have been started and are being modelled and led so well here to carry on all the way across the country. So what advice can I leave you with from a head's perspective if you were sitting in my office? Well, I've come to understand, principally since I've appointed Lorcan as my whole school director of sport, so much more about the fresh approach to physical literacy and the work that's being done here and indeed the partnership that we've developed with LBU. I know a little bit more now than as a head I ever did about long-term athletic development, PE and games. And I'm conscious completely that that needs to be understood at the top and it needs to be led from the top in any school if you want to get cut through. So what do I think that heads, members of SLT and all of you could be doing to improve that? Well, the first thing I want to encourage you to do is to manage up. I don't know what your relationship, those of you who are in schools, is like with the head or members of the SLT. I don't know how much they carry on an assessment, an understanding, an interest in what you are doing. Are they just assuming that you are carrying on teaching the way they experienced PE teaching 50 or so years ago? If so, are they happy with that? So I think the first thing is manage up. All heads need to know the kinds of information we've already heard this morning. We've only been here an hour. All heads need to know that. And so I would suggest that you think about who you can work with in your current school, whether you are coming at it from a coach's point of view, a teacher's point of view, a director of sports point of view. Who can you work with? Because it will need a group of you to present a plan and to get the agreement from your SLT that they will table that plan on an agenda and invite you to come and talk to it. Now, if you're up for this challenge, all heads and SLTs, despite what people think, they swan around, they don't do enough teaching, they've got loads of time. Let me tell you, it's flat out. And that's why you don't get an email answer until midnight. It's flat out. Everybody wants a piece of you. You are running from pillar to post. Of course you try and look like everything's all graceful and swan-like on the surface. It absolutely isn't. So make any paper that you are willing to produce as a group of people working together on this, and based on the kind of information that you know we can tap into from here and others, make it maximum 2 sides. The closest you can get to one side, the better. Lay out very clearly what the context is in which you are presenting this paper. What's that current context? Why do things need to be looked at through a different lens? What's the current research telling us? And then proposing a new way, section 3, this is how we could do something differently in this school. And of course, what it would take to do that is this, and this. Now, it's very unlikely, let me just manage your expectations, that the SLT and or the head are going to receive that paper, send it in advance always, give people a chance to read it, hear you talk about it for 15 minutes, ask you questions about it for another 15 minutes, because you're probably only going to get half an hour slot, I'm not giving you a lot. And actually, you've got to use that time to the maximum. Punchy, bullet points, let people know what's going on. Because very few heads in SLTs understand the research that goes behind some of the headlines that we've all read, and how the physical literacy agenda could help. It's a radical rethink of the way we collaborate and pull things together in schools. It's a radical rethink of the way we teach sport and PE. And the more schools that start to embrace it, the better the options for our children, and that is what we're all about. So try to manage it as my first piece of advice as a head. Because secondly, the second thing is because schools need to have a strategy for this. Sure, we've all got school development plans, and they've got loads of lines on them, each of which has a strategic work stream that goes alongside it. But if physical literacy, sport, PE, whatever it is that's the best terminology in your school, if that's not one of them, please do your bit from my point 1 to try and get it on there. Because it needs to be on there, so that we don't just have groups of heads carrying on, thinking that what went on 50 years ago when they were at school did them no harm whatsoever on the sports pitch, and as long as that's carrying on and it's out of people's hair, we're fine. There's too much research that's gone into this, and those of us working in schools know the power of having a strategic plan that thinks differently about how we do it. And if, like us, you're in a 3 to 18 school, may I suggest, look out for Sam's research when it's finished and published, but actually, how do you make that a through approach as well, across all parts of your school? And that there isn't a very different philosophy and experience in one part of the school to the other one. So I think that is important. Otherwise, all we'll do is share those lessons that we either enjoyed or endured 50 years ago, back in the 2020s. And then my final, if you like, suggestion, piece of advice, whatever you might want to call it, is that whole sense of, in producing the paper, you'll be doing this anyway, but sports staff working together, not just within your school, but across schools. That's teachers, that's coaches, it's heads of athletic development and directors of sport. It's making sure that you're working across schools regardless of whether they're independent or state, because children are children. And if we've got the ability to start to change things, and the work we can do can impact the change across a much bigger group of children than the ones we're actually teaching in our school, why would we not do that? I think if you're sitting here in a state school thinking, oh gosh, I don't know if that's possible, I bet if you tapped on the door of your local independent school, they would be willing to have a conversation with you. And if we're sitting here listening to this in an independent school, we should be reaching out to our local state schools and saying, do you want to be part of this? Do you want to be one of the beneficiaries? So it's not just our children who are benefiting, it's all the children that we can reach out to who could benefit from this. Because this isn't an area of competition, this is an area of huge importance for our children and their futures against the picture and the context that we've had described so well so far this morning. So I would say that we do need to be working together and thinking more collaboratively about how we do things to impact the children in our towns, in our villages, in our city regions. And we want to do that based on the latest research about what will help children the most. Because if we apply that in all that we've learned on teaching and learning to how we teach English, what goes on in the science lab, why would we not apply the same information and learning that's going on into how we are handling physical literacy too? So folks, I know you are leading the way. You are bringing people together. And for non-sporty types like me, out of my comfort zone, it's really wonderful to see it. Because people like me need to learn more, and I suspect all heads do. And all heads need to then think, how do we apply that learning to our priorities and our development plan? So I'm so proud that we're part of this research and this work with all that's going on here at LBU. We are so grateful that you are trailblazing so much of this. You are putting our children's futures first. And then in turn, I think it's, for those of us working in schools and those of us who are the educators, it's our opportunity to respond to this moment and to reflect on our current policy and develop strategies so that all of this great learning and research that's going on can be put into practice. And it's for the benefit of all of our children, long into the future. For that reason, I don't think it could be more important. Very happy to take questions.
That was excellent. So we have time for a few questions, so if anyone has one, go for it. Yeah, Martin?
Sue, thank you for that. That was excellent. Question for me is one of the things is through HMC, through the heads annual conference, is there an opportunity there for someone like Kevin to present on this and the significance of that, to get that message out centrally in a week of work in our centres?
Absolutely. And I think actually the first place to start is actually to get Kevin in front of the sports committee, because there's an HMC sports committee. So I think to have something like the presentation you shared and the work that's going on in the centre here, sharing that with that committee, then the next step that would come from that would then be able to become a workshop session that's offered at the HMC annual conference. So I think that's a great idea. So I'll take that away as an action point for me.
Anyone else?
How would you create a greater emphasis on sport in schools that are very academically driven?
That are academically driven. I think that you use all of this data that's coming out, don't you? Because I think we all know, and I bet we can quote, some of the most talented athletes that I've seen come through the schools that I've been in have very often been my most talented academics. I remember a girl who was a national runner a few years ago, before she went off to Oxford to read medicine. Straight A star student throughout her whole career, an absolute superstar, and a really decent and humble young woman as well, more to the point perhaps, who used to be doing her homework on the coach to and from fixtures, who used to sit out when she wasn't actually doing her bit in whatever the fixture was had gone to. She'd sit out and do it. I mean, she was absolutely like a machine. So first of all, let's think about, look at the boat race, for goodness sake. I mean, they're not exactly academic slots, are they? Rowing those boats up and down the Thames. We know that there are fantastic academic students who are also fantastic athletes, whether it's at a competitive level or not. But actually, we know that the sort of discipline and training that goes into being a great academic actually lends itself to being a great sports person, or at least somebody who's involved in health and physical fitness. So I think you now have got this amazing sort of series of papers which are depressing in the extreme, that tell us about the greatest degree of unhappiness, the greatest degree of dissatisfaction, the greatest lack of fitness in some pockets, actually to almost, as part of a paper that you would take to talk about with your SLT, actually how can we be part of the solution that gives these children the break that they need so that they can perform at their best and it won't impact their performance. And I bet you can find examples of data that would prove that, but actually just give them the let-outs that they also need, so that they don't just burn themselves out and run themselves into the ground on an academic front. So for me, I think there must be lots of examples we could use, and maybe we could gather from around the room that people could quote. Your heads and SLTs will also know of examples if they're being super honest. So I think it's about talking about all of the advantages and setting up the positive habits for life that will go way beyond what exam results they get. in my view.
Perfect. I think that was excellent, and kind of we probably need to get on with a little bit of the rest of today. But I just, on behalf of everyone here at Leeds Beckett, I just want to have a massive thank you again for you coming along, and a last round of applause, please, for Sue.